Imagine standing on your own dock, enjoying a peaceful morning coffee, when a group of people in polo shirts and clipboards march onto your property, threatening to tow your boat. Sounds ridiculous, right? But that's exactly what happened to me. And what they didn't know, was that I held a secret they never saw coming. That morning started like any other. The water was calm, the sun reflecting in golden streaks across my boat, the Freedom Belle. I'd owned her for years, restoring every inch of wood with my own hands. She wasn't just a boat, she was family. Then came the sound of car doors slamming. 5 HOA board members strutted down my driveway, wearing the smug expressions of people who thought rules applied everywhere, even where they had no authority. The leader, a sharp-jawed man named Gregory, held up his clipboard like it was a badge of honor. "Sir," he barked, "this vessel is in violation of HOA guidelines. You'll need to remove it immediately or we'll have it towed by tonight." I nearly choked on my coffee. Violation? This is my dock. My land. My boat. Gregory smirked, tapping his clipboard. "This lake falls under HOA jurisdiction. All boats require board approval. Yours isn't approved. Consider this your final warning." The audacity was almost laughable. But instead of arguing, I smiled. Because unlike them, I actually knew the truth about this lake. See, years back, when the developer went bankrupt, I'd bought not just my property, but the entire lake access rights. Every dock, every slip, every shed, technically rested on land I owned. I watched them walk away, chuckling among themselves, already celebrating their victory. They didn't know they'd just declared war. That night, I stayed up late, pulling old documents from my safe, the deed, the plat maps, and the original contracts. Every word screamed one undeniable fact: the HOA was squatting on my property. The next morning, instead of waking to the sound of birds, they woke to the sound of my lawyer delivering official eviction notices. This wasn't just about a boat anymore. This was about reminding the HOA of one simple truth: you don't bite the hand that owns the lake. Word spread like wildfire. By mid-morning, HOA board members were gathered in disbelief, staring at the thick envelopes in their hands. Each notice was formal, notarized, and stamped with county approval. They weren't suggestions. They were orders. Gregory's face turned beet red as he read aloud. Evicted from docks, sheds, and slips effective immediately. This is outrageous. Outrageous? Maybe. Legal? Absolutely. See, while the HOA had long acted like they owned the lake, the truth was buried in paperwork. The moment the original developer sold off the last lot, their authority stopped at the edge of people's lawns. Everything beyond. It belonged to me. And while I'd allowed them to use the lake for years, their arrogance had pushed me too far. Neighbors who had once whispered about the HOA's power suddenly looked at me like I was holding Excalibur. Because in a way, I was. That evening, I walked down to the docks. Several families stood nervously beside their boats, unsure if I'd force them out too. That's when I made something clear. This isn't about you. This is about the board. They tried to threaten me with towing my own boat. You're safe. But their days of bullying are over. Relief spread across their faces. One man even patted me on the back, whispering, "It's about time someone stood up to them." The board, however, wasn't relieved. Gregory called an emergency meeting, summoning his allies to the clubhouse like generals plotting revenge. Through the windows, I could see them pacing, pointing, and yelling. Papers flew. Phones buzzed. They thought they could fight me with intimidation. What they didn't realize was that every move they made was like throwing pebbles at a fortress. By the end of the night, half the neighborhood knew the truth. The HOA wasn't in charge anymore. And the more they resisted, the deeper their hole became. I could feel it, the tide had shifted. And soon, the lake that once echoed with HOA orders would roar with something they couldn't silence: justice. The very next morning, I woke up to the sound of shouting. From my window, I saw Gregory and two other board members pacing along the shoreline, pointing at my dock like generals surveying a battlefield. Their clipboards were gone, replaced by stacks of papers they waved in the air like shields. Gregory spotted me stepping outside and barked, "You can't evict us. The HOA bylaws supersede your little deed." I raised an eyebrow, holding my own folder of documents. Bylaws? Those end at the property lines. Out here, you're trespassers. My deed is the only law that matters. But Gregory wasn't about to back down. He sneered. "We'll see you in court. And when we win, your boat will be gone." Court. The word hung in the air like a storm cloud. That was their big move, scare me into backing off. But they didn't realize I'd already spoken to my lawyer, who assured me their case was as empty as their threats. By midday, the board had plastered angry flyers around the neighborhood, calling me a rogue owner, and urging residents to stand united against lake seizure. The irony nearly made me laugh. They were the ones seizing what wasn't theirs. That evening, a few neighbors stopped by my porch, holding the flyers. "Look," one said, "we don't want trouble. But everyone knows you're right. The board's just desperate." Desperate was putting it lightly. The eviction notices had shaken their empire, and Gregory was clinging to whatever scraps of authority he thought he had. Later that night, I walked down to the lake, listening to the crickets and the gentle lap of water. My boat bobbed quietly, lantern light glowing across its polished surface. But beyond the calm, I could sense the war was only beginning. The board wasn't done fighting. They were about to make their boldest, and dumbest, move yet, one that would backfire so hard, it would unravel their entire reign. It happened just past midnight. I was drifting into sleep when a faint metallic clink echoed from outside. My instincts kicked in. I grabbed a flashlight and hurried toward the dock. The beam cut across the water, and that's when I saw them, two shadowy figures crouched near my boat, fumbling with ropes. My blood ran cold. They weren't just threatening anymore. They were trying to sabotage my boat. "Hey!" I shouted. The figures froze, then bolted down the dock. My flashlight caught a glimpse of one face, Gregory's vice president, a wiry man named Carl. They vanished into the night, but not before leaving behind their handiwork: frayed ropes, loosened knots, and a jagged tool glinting on the dock. They'd tried to cut my boat free, hoping it would drift and wreck against the rocks. My anger boiled. This wasn't just HOA harassment anymore. This was criminal. The next morning, I reported everything to the sheriff. Photos of the damage, the tool left behind, even the shoe prints leading back toward the neighborhood. The sheriff nodded grimly. "Looks like sabotage. We'll have a word with them." Word spread fast. By afternoon, whispers rippled across the community: the board had been caught sneaking around at night, trying to sink a neighbor's boat. Families who once tolerated the HOA's bossy rules now looked at them with disgust. Gregory called another emergency meeting, but this time, fewer people showed up. Even some of his allies were backing away, embarrassed by the board's reckless behavior. That evening, I stood by the lake, staring at my boat. She was safe, but the message was clear: the board had crossed a line they could never uncross. For years, they had ruled with fear, threatening fines, sending letters, barking orders. But now, everyone saw the truth. They weren't protectors of the neighborhood. They were bullies, willing to break the law just to cling to power. And me? I wasn't about to let them slink away quietly. If they wanted a fight, I'd give them one they'd never forget. Because this lake wasn't just water and docks. It was mine. And soon, the HOA would realize they weren't just losing authority. They were about to lose everything. The next morning, I got a call from the sheriff. His tone was sharp but steady. "We've had a word with your HOA board. Let's just say they're not thrilled about our involvement. But listen, keep an eye out. People like that don't back down easy." It was both a warning and a promise. The sheriff knew what they'd done was criminal, but small-town politics often tangled with HOA influence. Gregory and his cronies had friends in county offices, and I knew they'd use every string they could pull. That afternoon, I walked through the neighborhood. The air was thick with tension. Some residents waved at me, quietly supportive, while others turned their backs, afraid of getting caught in the crossfire. HOA flyers still clung to lampposts, though they looked weathered and ignored, like relics of a dying power. By evening, Gregory himself came storming up my driveway. His fists clenched, his jaw tight. "You think you've won? The sheriff might play along, but this lake belongs to the community. You can't just evict us all." I didn't even flinch. Instead, I handed him a copy of the deed, the eviction notice, and the sheriff's incident report about the sabotage. "You already tried to destroy my boat. Now the law is watching you. Keep pushing, and you'll lose more than just your lake privileges." Gregory's face darkened. "This isn't over," he spat before stomping away. But in my gut, I knew it was over. Not for me, but for them. Because once the law saw the HOA board for what they were, it was only a matter of time before their little empire collapsed. That night, as I stood on my dock under a blanket of stars, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. My boat rocking gently at the pier. The water reflecting moonlight. And the knowledge that soon, the lake would finally be free of their iron grip. The sheriff's words echoed in my mind, "Keep an eye out." It wasn't just a warning. It was a reminder that Gregory's pride was a ticking time bomb. And I had to be ready for the explosion. The following week was like watching a dam start to break. Small cracks appeared in the HOA's authority, and every day those cracks grew wider. First, 2 board members resigned quietly. Carl, the man caught near my boat, was suddenly on leave. The whispers around the neighborhood said his wife had forced him to step back after the sabotage scandal embarrassed their family. Then, a group of homeowners gathered near the clubhouse, demanding answers. "Why are we paying HOA fees if you're spending them on lawyers to fight one man?" a woman shouted. Her words cut deep, and murmurs of agreement rose from the crowd. I stayed back, watching from the edge of the street. It was like witnessing a house of cards collapse in slow motion. Gregory tried to rally, waving his arms and insisting, "We're protecting your property values." But no one seemed convinced anymore. That evening, a knock came at my door. It was a middle-aged couple who owned one of the lake's oldest docks. They looked nervous. "Look," the man said, shifting uncomfortably, "we never liked the board, but we thought they had authority. Now, well, we know the truth. If you let us keep our dock, we'll sign whatever agreement you need." I smiled. This isn't about punishing neighbors. It's about stopping the bullies. As long as you respect the rules of my deed, your dock is safe. Their relief was instant, and I could tell they'd spread the word. By the weekend, support for the board had dwindled. Where there were once packed HOA meetings, only a handful of loyalists showed up. And even they looked tired, drained from trying to defend the indefensible. Still, Gregory refused to give up. His pride wouldn't allow it. I spotted him late one night at the lake, staring out at the water like it was slipping through his fingers. His posture was tense, shoulders hunched, fists clenched. He wasn't just fighting for control anymore. He was fighting for his identity. And that made him dangerous. The cracks in his armor were showing, but a man cornered is unpredictable. And I knew Gregory wasn't done trying to strike back. What he didn't realize was that every move he made only pulled him closer to the one thing he feared most, complete and permanent eviction. It was the Saturday of the HOA's so-called unity meeting. Gregory had plastered flyers across every mailbox, promising a final vote to reclaim control of the lake. I knew what that meant, one last desperate attempt to convince the neighborhood that his authority still mattered. The clubhouse parking lot was packed when I arrived. Neighbors gathered in folding chairs, some curious, others anxious. Gregory stood at the front, microphone in hand, his voice booming with rehearsed confidence. "This lake," he declared, "belongs to the community. This man," he pointed at me with theatrical fury, "is trying to strip away your rights and destroy your neighborhood values." Some people clapped half-heartedly, but most sat in silence. I could feel the shift. His words didn't carry weight anymore. They sounded hollow, desperate. When he finished his speech, I stepped forward. Calm. Steady. And then, without saying a word, I held up the deed to the lake. The room went silent. "This isn't about stripping rights," I said. "It's about stopping lies. This deed proves what I've said all along. The HOA never owned this lake. You've been bullied, fined, and threatened for years, but it was all smoke and mirrors. And when they couldn't control me with lies, they tried sabotage." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Gregory's face turned red as he shouted, "Lies. All lies." But the sheriff, who had been quietly sitting in the back, stood up. "Not lies," the sheriff said firmly. "We have evidence of your board's misconduct. And if you keep pushing, Gregory, you'll be facing charges." The room erupted. Some residents cheered. Others simply sighed in relief. For the first time in years, the HOA's chokehold was broken. Gregory slammed down the microphone and stormed out, his footsteps echoing like the last sounds of a crumbling empire. But even as he disappeared into the night, I knew he wasn't done. Not yet. The next morning, something incredible happened. Instead of HOA board members patrolling the shoreline with clipboards, families were down by the docks, laughing, talking, even fishing. Kids splashed in the shallow water. Fathers grilled burgers near the shore. It felt like the lake had been reborn overnight. Neighbors approached me one by one, thanking me. "We forgot what it felt like," one woman said with tears in her eyes. "For years, this place felt like a prison. Now it feels like home again." I realized then that the HOA had never just controlled property, they had stolen joy. They had replaced freedom with fear, and now that fear was gone. Still, Gregory lurked in the background. I caught sight of him driving past slowly, glaring from his SUV as if the lake itself had betrayed him. His presence cast a shadow, a reminder that while the board was broken, his pride was still dangerous. That night, sitting on my dock, I thought about what came next. Evicting the board wasn't just about reclaiming space, it was about rebuilding trust. The neighborhood needed more than freedom, it needed healing. So I drafted new agreements, simple ones. No fines. No threats. Just respect. Each family could keep their dock as long as they honored basic safety rules and respected the water. When I presented it the next day, people signed eagerly. Smiles returned. Laughter echoed across the lake. The water sparkled brighter, as if the lake itself was celebrating its freedom. For the first time in years, it truly felt like mine again, not because I owned it, but because I had given it back to the people who cherished it. But even in that joy, I couldn't shake the feeling, Gregory wasn't finished. He'd lost the battle, but men like him don't walk away quietly. And I was right. His final act would be the most explosive of all. It was late evening when it happened. I was locking up the boathouse when Gregory stormed down the dock, his face pale and wild, his hands shaking. "You think you've won?" he hissed. "You humiliated me. You destroyed everything I built." I stayed calm. "You destroyed yourself, Gregory." The people saw the truth. He stepped closer, his eyes blazing. "No. This lake was mine to control. Without the HOA, I'm nothing." For a moment, I saw not just anger, but desperation. A man who had tied his entire identity to power, and now had nothing left. Behind me, a few neighbors had gathered, watching nervously. One of them called out, "Greg, go home. It's over." But Gregory wasn't listening. His voice cracked as he shouted, "I'll never let you take this from me." I reached into my folder and pulled out one last document, the court-stamped validation of my deed. I held it up under the dock lights. "You already lost. This proves it. There's nothing left for you to fight." Gregory froze, his shoulders slumping, his fury collapsing into silence. For the first time, he looked small. Just a man, stripped of the authority he'd once wielded like a sword. The sheriff arrived moments later, summoned by the neighbors who feared things would escalate. He placed a hand on Gregory's shoulder. "It's over. Walk away while you still can." Gregory didn't resist. He just lowered his head and walked off the dock, disappearing into the night for the last time. The HOA was dead. And with it, so was the fear that had haunted this lake for years. The next morning, the lake was alive. Children raced along the shoreline, neighbors gathered for a community cookout, and boats glided across the water without fear of some clipboard-wielding board member barking orders. As I stood on my dock, coffee in hand, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. True, unshakable peace. One by one, neighbors came to thank me. An elderly man who had nearly sold his home because of HOA harassment shook my hand with tears in his eyes. A young couple told me their kids could finally swim without being fined for noise. I realized then that this fight had been about more than property rights. It was about dignity. About freedom. About giving people their lake back. That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the water shimmered gold. My boat rocked gently, safe and secure, a symbol of everything the HOA had tried, and failed, to take from me. I took a deep breath, the cool evening air filling my lungs. "It's over," I whispered to myself. "The lake is ours again." And in that moment, surrounded by laughter, music, and the glow of lanterns along the shoreline, I knew the truth. This wasn't just my victory. It was everyone's. The HOA had tried to tow my boat. Instead, I had evicted their entire empire. And the lake had never looked more beautiful.